Order, order. Hello and welcome to Reporters Without Orders, a podcast where we talk about what made news, what didn't, and some things that absolutely shouldn't have. I'm your host Tanishka Sodhi, and we're joined by two of my Newslaundry colleagues today. The first is a special guest, Manisha Pande. I'm sure you all are familiar with her work, so I will spare the introduction. Hi Manisha, same
Hello.
place, different show.
Yes, very happy to be on Reporters Without Orders.
Manisha has just returned from an election trail in Jammu and Kashmir. We're going to be discussing her report, especially her story from the ground titled Inside Kashmir's Media Crisis. If we speak, we'll get a call. Want to go home, not jail. Our second guest is Newslaundry's Shivnarayan Rajpurohit. Hi Shiv, how are you?
Hi, good.
Shiv's story from this week is titled Despite NGT order, an Adani-operated coal mine got environmental clearance in Chhattisgarh. So we're going to be discussing that. Let's start with Manisha's story, which is a 360-degree story about the media mahal in Kashmir. So Manisha, since 2019, we've all been aware of the clampdown of media in Kashmir, and especially since you follow it so closely, you know about this very well. So what really came as a surprise to you on ground while reporting on this?
Yeah, that's a very good question because actually in Newslaundry, not just before 2000, at the time of 2019, but before that also, we've kept a very close eye on Kashmir and the media scenario there. It's known to be a place with a very vibrant media ecosystem. You have lots of newspapers, lots of journalists, not just in Kashmir, in the valley, but also in New Delhi. So it has this vibrant, scenario, which changed quite a bit in 2019. And I remember the first report that Ayush Tiwari, one of our reporters, had done when the abrogation had happened. We had headlined it Pen Drives and Gumption, which was about how journalists, because there was a complete internet blackout, they were writing their stories, putting it on a pen drive, and then giving it to a colleague, whoever was coming to Delhi, to give it to their offices. That was the scenario under which these guys had to report what had happened, the impact of abrogation. Since then, you guys have done reports, you've done reports. So many of our Newslaundry colleagues have done reports on journalists arrested under PSA, under UAPA, what's happened to the newspapers there. But I was still thoroughly shocked because, frankly, we really don't know the scale and scope of what has happened there since 2019. And it's very difficult to quantify it, to talk about it, because the moment you talk about it, you have to get specifics with examples. And most journalists do not want to get specific because that makes them doubly more vulnerable.
Right.
So there is this big difficulty of reporting on what's happening there because people don't really want to come on record.
Yeah.
But I think what I was really surprised at was that reporting on the conflict has always been contentious.
Yeah.
And you are easily labeled a separatist, even if you simply put out the version of a victim in, say, a crossfire. But what I was hearing from a lot of journalists was that now you can get calls for very basic stories, for quoting from a press conference. A press conference has happened, we've quoted something, but we could get a call on why did you quote this, why did you put it that way, why have you used this language, why have you gone with that headline. So the kind of intense scrutiny under which journalists were operating is what really surprised me. And I was really joking with my friends there and colleagues back here also that, look, we are living in Sweden. I think we should be really happy. We are in a phenomenal state of press freedom here. Because really, journalists, they have to really think a lot. And hats off to them that so many of them are still doing stories. So much stuff is still coming out in mainstream newspapers, at least, about Kashmir, despite this intense scrutiny.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, many of them did not want to come on record. And in your video, we've seen a bunch of journalists speak. But how many did you speak to off record? Because I'm sure a lot of that was not.
I spoke to many journalists just to capture the sense of, the word that I use in the report in the beginning is a sense of suffocation. And I got that sense really after these 5 days of intense speaking to people. And I think one of the important things to note in the story is the media scene, we know, okay, there's censorship. But what happens when you self-censor to such an extent? What impact does it have in society? And I think Kashmir is a textbook example of that. That is something that you don't see in the rest of India. Uttar Pradesh also, you've done that story of the journalist who was arrested, who finally died, unfortunately. And you spoke to journalists there about how difficult it is for them also to report. They can get an FIR lodged on something as simple as reporting on corruption in midday meal scheme. So you have that, but you have journalists pushing back, right? You have independent media pushing back. As a result of which, when you go out, you talk to people in UP, people will still talk about what they're feeling. In Kashmir, what has happened is that there is this sense of hopelessness around speaking itself. And that, I think, was something that really caught my eye, that, just normally taking a stroll in the market, if you talk to someone, there are 2 to 3 kind of stock responses you'll get. One is that, why? What will happen if we speak? Who's listening to us? Second is that such big journalists have been arrested. They've been raided. They're under terror laws. If they have no protection, what protection do we have? And that's very important to note, because journalists are protected by, they're supposed to be at least protected by laws. And when those protections fade away, there's a sense of insecurity among the general public, that if this can happen to a journalist, what will happen to me?
Right.
And the third is this, like, whatever, we're going through, it doesn't matter to anyone. And that creates a deep sense of alienation in people. So I think from the lens of also understanding what censorship in newsrooms or in the news can do to a general public, how it can really bring your morale down as a society, is very important to study. And I think it's very important for people to take note of.
Right.
The breathtaking beauty of Kashmir conceals a harsher truth.
अगर हम बयान सच बोलेगा तो पुलिस पकड़ के लेके जाए,
मुंह से कुछ निकलेगा तो शाम को उसको ले जाएंगे,
जो सच बोलता है उसको पकड़ के लेके जाए।
मीडिया तो सारा फेक बता रहा है।
डर का माहौल है, सब डर का माहौल है।
The joke in Srinagar is that there is freedom of expression in Kashmir, but there is no freedom after expression.
A Kashmiri, he doesn't speak out his mind. The fear factor is at work.
Is it silence or survival? Because people are silent because they want to survive.
Reporting on the ground has been criminalized in a way.
After the abrogation of Article 370, things have changed. Everything is changed. So everybody is trying to build here in Kashmir the narrative of the government of India.
वो तो बादशाह है, उनके साथ क्या करें? I cannot speak against the बादशाह. Can anybody say? बादशाह को तो सलूट करना है ना.
There was one person in your story who had said that the papers talk about, okay, it's raining here, this road is not functioning, but what beyond that, right? Because, of course, system...
so many people would say that कि ये बस inauguration की बात करते हैं, laser show हो गया, ये हो गया, वो हो गया. तो ये है, that sense. And then, what they then say is that, look, if they are not talking, can we really talk? Should we even venture into this?
But are they well versed with what's happening to the media? Like you said, that they think that, okay, if a journalist is arrested, what about us? So does that news get
in Srinagar,
carried?
Yes.
Okay.
In Srinagar, there is a lot of conversation about journalists and activists. In outside Srinagar and rural parts of India, there are more personal stories of young people being picked up under PSA.
Right.
So they will talk more about कि किसी ने कुछ tweet किया, किसी ने उसने Facebook में कुछ लिख दिया, उसको उठा लिया, किसी ने कुछ बोल दिया, उसको उठा लिया. So that kind of conversation.
Right. So the PSA Act in Kashmir, it also says that up to 2 years they can keep you
and there's
detained.
no judicial recourse. That's the harder part.
Right.
In fact, off the record, there is a sense that UAPA is better than PSA. Like, to have people arrested under UAPA, you can at least go appeal. You can have those, monthly, like we're seeing in the case of Umar Khalid.
Yeah.
At least there is some kind of judicial recourse in UAPA. So it's a success if more people are arrested under UAPA than PSA.
Yeah. And what is mainstream media like in Kashmir? I mean, do the reporters there have a softer Godi bias in a way because they also are from Kashmir and maybe they're more sympathetic to the cause? Or is it as bad as what we see in Delhi, what we see in Mumbai?
I think the comparison doesn't exist actually. We can't really compare them to the Godi GVs of Delhi because here it's an ideological alignment with the government, and we know a lot of the times it's not even the government asking them to do things. When they're saying Modi, jo bhi hai, avatar hai, Vishnu ka, it's not some note that's gone out to them. It's a lot of it is ideological alignment. I think in Kashmir, what has happened to a lot of journalists is just an intense sense of fear, I think.
Yeah.
Because you've had so many raids, you've had so many arrests. So I think there's a deep sense of insecurity. And the second thing I think also is that the media landscape in Kashmir has always been questioned. It's always been in shades of grey. So 2008, some of the newspapers today who only talk about Amit Shah, Modi and LG on their front page, Back in 2008, they were accused of being separatist mouthpieces. In 2016, during the whole Burhan issue, they were accused of stoking violence. And there's always the question of funding, like where is their funding coming from? Which agency is behind them? So I think they're also vulnerable because there is this added label of having sided with separatists at one time, and even money may be finding its way into your organization. So you're dealing with a very serious charge, and if you have such a scrutiny on you, you have to comply because you don't know what it could lead to if you don't comply. So,
And what about the independent voices in Kashmir? Have they reduced? If yes, where have the others gone? Have they switched professions, or are they now reporting as part of what mainstream media is also reporting?
I think you still have a lot of good journalism coming out of Kashmir, and that is mostly newspapers that are based in Delhi. So say the Hindu, the Indian Express, the Economic Times has, a reporter there. Quint, mainstream digital news organizations that operate out of Delhi. So they have been able to still put out quite a few stories. And that's where you'll see people talk about, say, the drug issue. Express had a 2-part series, I think, on the heroin addiction there. DW had a documentary on that, and incidentally, that journalist is arrested under UAPA. He's still in jail in Delhi, Irfan Mehraj. So I think those are the pockets where you're seeing good journalism, credible journalism.
When there is a backing of an organization.
When there's a backing of a Delhi-based organization, because you cannot put an Indian Express journalist in a jail and, not expect any kind of... Or you can't... I think it was The Wire that put out a list of assaults, quote-unquote, on journalists since 2019. And one of the things was the Indian Express journalist and the Economic Times journalist was called to a counter-insurgency cell and interrogated. These cells are notorious. I mean, they have a history of being places where you don't want to go to. So apparently they were summoned there. That's what The Wire report at least said. But when something like that happens, there's a lot of furor in Delhi. So there's protection. I do feel, though, that we could have done more as journalists in Delhi to highlight what was happening post-2019. Maybe a delegation of journalists from here should have gone there. Because I think it's really extraordinary what's happened there. The taking over of Press Club, it's just dystopian to see that the Press Club is a police station.
But the person
just imagine.
who apparently helped the police in that, he spoke to us now. I mean, has he sort of switched his...
Salim Pandit. No, he's a journalist with the Times of India, and he says that he was wrongly targeted.
Okay.
There was an allegation against you on Press Club कि आपने coup organize करा along with your bodyguards and you were instrumental in banning
me. मैं तो सीधा गया था. It was not. देखिए, security यहाँ सब journalists को है. By the way, every journalist has a security here. It's not only me. I am being covered by the security.
Not everyone.
Everyone.
Many journalists I met don't have security.
No, बताओ किसका?
Many of them. I've met reporters who work in mainstream organizations. Do you think it's a problem for Kashmiri journalists when they get called BJP agents or stooges of the BJP?
Yaar, it's really a stigma here. Being a BJP man or a BJP agent means it's a stigma. Otherwise also, there is presidential rule this time here in J&K. उसमें तो curtailments होगी. Curtailment तो है because of the rule. It's a central rule here. उससे पहले भी होता था. Again, I will just refer. एक ज़माने में मेरे खिलाफ भी महबूबा ने FIR कर दिया on a story about the stone pelting on the tourists.
You have a lot of anger against the previous governments.
They are all traitors. ये सब traitor है.
And what about the BJP?
And see, that's the most complex part about Kashmir, is that every journalist also feels this sense of victimhood because of these labels that have been thrown at them for now 20 years, 30 years. So the moment you show something which is showing the government of India in good light, you're immediately an IB agent or an army agent or a government agent, which is very dangerous in Kashmir. It can mean militant, attacks on you.
Yeah, it's not just a label.
It's not just a label. So he said that, I had done a report on how tourists were, stone pelted during the Amarnath Yatra. I think this was the case when Amarnath Yatris were attacked.
Okay.
And I think he had put out that, they were, and he had an FIR against him. The Mehbooba government had filed an FIR that, tourists, how can you say the tourists were stone pelted? That's never happened in Kashmir. So he has that grouse that, I'm just called an agent just simply because I'm putting out the other view. So I think, but he completely denied that he helped the police and all that. He said he has bodyguards, and people just mistook those bodyguards for like a police overtake. But the fact is that the press club was lost.
He also interestingly said that every journalist has a bodyguard, which
is not true.
Yeah, you asked him a few times, but I don't think he responded properly to that. That every
I think
journalist...
the NDTV journalist has.
Okay.
He has. A couple of other journalists also have, but I think they will probably be senior. Like Sujat Bukhari had.
Yeah.
He was gunned down nevertheless, but he had.
Yeah.
But no, like a regular reporter does not have. At least I didn't meet any reporters with bodyguards around them.
Right. And the Kashmir press, a Kashmir press body responded to our story calling it propaganda. Did you see that coming? And where do you think that's coming from? I mean, there have been stories on media in Kashmir over the last few years. I'm not sure if they've responded so aggressively always.
Yeah, it's very lengthy.
Yeah.
And I love that they've said that she's offered free consultancy when no one asked her. I said, yaar, ye tumhara kaam hai to offer free consultancy.
Yeah, it's again, I think, really rather long. It can be a
But that's,
story
you
by
know,
itself.
standard. Like, whenever you critique the media, it's not just there, but even in, you know, back here when we report on what the channels are doing, we do get this pushback, right? Ki tum kaun hote ho hame bolne wale? So that's a very standard response. I think it comes from the sense that media is not accountable to anyone, and the media is supposed to be asking questions of everyone, but must not be asked any questions of itself. I think that's a thoroughly incorrect kind of position to take, especially when the report talks to the average person in Kashmir. We have 2 bites at least, and that you hear that across Kashmir. People do genuinely feel कि हमारी बातें नहीं आ रही है न्यूज़पेपर में.
वो लगता है आपके मुद्दे उठते हैं अखबारों में? नहीं, बिल्कुल भी नहीं. वो आम बातें कर रहे होते हैं. आज मौसम बड़ा अच्छा है, आज इतने लोगों ने वहाँ पे विजिटर गए हुए थे, आज यहाँ पे इतने लोग आ गए, उन्होंने चक्कर किया, वो सैर के वो वापस चले गए, ये वाला फ्रूट चल रहा है, वो वाले बाग खुल गए हैं, इतने लोग मारे गए, इतना एक्सीडेंट हो गया, आज स्कूल खुल गए, स्कूल बंद हो गए. बस इसी के बारे में लिखते हैं. जो मेन मुद्दा है वो भूल जाते हैं.
क्या चाहती हैं आपके अखबारों में, क्या बातें हों?
जो इस वक्त माहौल है, जो बच्चे चाह रहे हैं कि हमें नौकरियां मिले, भाई हम पढ़े लिखे हैं, हमारा बिजनेस आगे चले, हमारे बच्चे आगे बढ़े, अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट ख़त्म हो, इसके बारे में वो लिखते नहीं है. डर डर के जी रहे हैं. उसकी वजह से आवाम की भी ज़बान बंद है, वो भी डर रहे हैं. कहते जब मीडिया आवाज़ नहीं उठाता तो हम कहाँ आवाज़ उठाएंगे.
अपना जो लोकल मीडिया है वो है ही नहीं. न्यूज़पेपर्स देख लो आप या ऐसे न्यूज़ चैनल्स, कहीं कुछ है ही नहीं, मतलब कोई बात ही नहीं है. द क्वेश्चन शुड बी, इज इट साइलेंस और सर्वाइवल? Because people are silent because they want to survive. It's like that. People don't want to get into the trouble. हमने कुछ कह दिया and then उसका जो impact होगा उसको वो हमारी family को भी face करना पड़ेगा. इस वजह से people are like, you especially young persons, they are like चुप ही रहते हैं, वही काफ़ी है.
ठीक है, अमित शाह आ गए हैं, मोदी आ गए हैं, एलजी ने सबको ईद ग्रीट करा है, बट जो हमारे मुद्दे हैं, जो हमारे इतने बच्चे पीएसए में बंद हैं, उनके बारे में कोई क्यों नहीं बोल रहा है?
Public Safety Act has been termed controversial by a lot of rights groups, even within India and also outside. But when they are booked under Public Safety Act, it gives an entirely different, it brings an entirely different kind of storm in his life. And the thing is that there is no redressal system. There is no platform where you can put your own put yourself or explain your position. That kind of space has been limited to a great extent in the last 5-6 years.
So you have to be, if as a media person you lose touch with what your audience thinks about you, I think you're as good as dead. And that's something they should think about rather than putting out long statements.
So that way newspaper circulation has also gone down because people don't trust these papers.
In fact, Saeed Malik, he's a veteran journalist there, he told me that privately a lot of newsmen agree to the fact that circulations have gone down. And I have a little thing with a newspaper vendor there also who says कि अब कोई बिक्री नहीं होती. Only अगर आपको notice डालना हो तो people buy that for that notice to see कि notice आया है नहीं आया.
पहले कितना सेल होता था और अब कितना होता है?
पहले 100% सेल होता है, इस वक्त कुछ नहीं होता.
तो कोई नहीं खरीदता है अखबार?
कोई नहीं, जिनकी आप नोटिस होती है वही खरीदते हैं.
But that could also be post-pandemic, how we've seen nationwide a drop in circulation, perhaps.
But see, Kashmir, for them, they had an intense internet shutdown through 2009.
Right.
So ideally, when there's no internet, there's nothing to do, you would have typically seen an uptick in sales, because what are the papers saying? What are they talking about? That is a very important aspect.
Yeah.
So, and then they've repeatedly suffered shutdowns. So ideally, I think their business should have gone up.
What do Kashmiri journalists and citizens think about journalists such as us coming from Delhi to speak about the media, speak about their issues? I mean, is it viewed as how in some places we encounter the tag of parachute journalism, not just from our colleagues, but also from the people, ki tum kahan se Delhi se aake hame pooch rahe ho? But sometimes it's also a sense of listen to our stories, at least someone is wants to know what's happening, wants to take this forward. So which way of the spectrum were they on?
I think there's a lot of resentment for journalists who come and set up shop outside the lake. And that one tea vendor, I don't know if you guys noticed, there's a floating market in Srinagar. So you go on your shikaras and you can drink kava and all that. And there's this one tea seller who's featured in every organization. Because he's a funny guy, he's interesting, he talks about, interesting way of selling his kava. But it's a stock image, right? So I think there's resentment among journalists that तुम यहाँ आते हो अपनी मतलब beautiful locations में Dal Lake में floating market में बात करके चले जाते हो. You're not really talking about the sense. So there is that disdain.
Yeah.
And there is this suspicion, especially from mainstream television news, I think, that this whole hype about tourism, of investments, why is it not being investigated? Kashmir has seen periodic years of peace, relatively, peace, normalcy, and an uptick in tourism. So to make this out to be something like it's never happened before, I think there's resentment to that. And then the discourse just stops at that. कि यहाँ पे tourist आ रहे हैं, खत्म. In fact, just journalists नहीं, कश्मीर की local population इतनी, because see वहाँ पे आप TV ही देखते हो. In fact, one of the young Kashmir University students I interviewed, she had something so evocative to say. She was saying कि abrogation हुआ within a 24 hours, whatever, the internet's shut down. पूरा कर्फ्यू है, we are sitting at home, we are worrying कि चावल कहाँ से आएगा. The only window to the outside world is television news. So we switch on the TV and we see people, वो पटाखे फूट रहे हैं, लोग मिठाइयाँ बांट रहे हैं, लोग लड्डू बांट रहे हैं. And that was so hurtful for average Kashmir that we were nowhere in that conversation. The whole country was celebrating joyously, and like what was happening to us was completely out of. And that really hurt. Like you speak to young students, they talk of that very often. You speak to people, they really talk about how we are completely missing. You're talking about Kashmir every day, but you never talk about us. And there's a huge resentment with the mainstream media on this particular issue, that we never feature in, in your conversations. We only feature when you want to say कि ये jihadi है, ये पत्थरबाज है, or whatever.
Yeah. But besides media, Manisha, what is the sense you are getting from people on ground? What are they voting for right now? 2 phases are done. There's 1 remaining. Is security a big issue? Article 370 jobs?
I think Article 370, there's in Kashmir, there's hurt and upsetness around it, but there's also an understanding that it's not going to come back.
Yeah.
Jammu, of course, is happy that it went away, and they really hoped that it would change their lives. They're upset because they feel it hasn't changed their lives in the way that it could have. But I think the immediate concern for for Kashmir at least is that, and Jammu also, they want freedom from this bureaucratic hold of the region. They want elected representatives.
Yeah.
So the surge in voting is also because they really want someone to go, who can represent them, who they can approach when they have a problem, because right now it's too centralized. So that is one of the main issues, I think, having elected representatives, having someone of your own represent you in parliament. Statehood is important for both regions. They both want statehood and protections that can come with the state. Unemployment is a perennial problem everywhere, all over India. But in Jammu and Kashmir, the literacy levels are very high. And number of people in government jobs are very high because of very few private investments. So that strain you see a lot in Jammu and Kashmir, this, anxiety around the fact that we don't have enough job opportunities here. Those are the key issues, I think. And of course, add to that in Kashmir, there's the PSA, UAPA and drug addiction, which a lot of people now talk about.
But are people going to vote on thinking about that?
I think it'll be very complicated to because people, since they don't talk so much, it's very hard to tell ki what are they really going to. But I think they definitely want to vote. I mean, one could see this vote as a protection from unaccountability of the bureaucracy. That I think is definitely in everyone's mind. Now, who they feel is best suited to protect them is
That's a question,
Yeah.
yeah. And you've covered various states during elections. Did Kashmir stand out in a way besides the beauty, of course? Was it a very
beauty to theek hai, but there's just so much kachra in Kashmir and around the waste
Really?
management. I was stunned to see the kind of waste littered all over Kashmir. And even when you go out of Kashmir, it's beautiful. It's a valley. There's a stream. There'll be forests. और उसके बगल में like a stream of waste. So I don't know what is happening to waste management in that region. It is shocking that this is a tourist destination
Yeah.
of such high caliber. It's genuinely beautiful, but there is no effort to make sure that there's no waste. It's one of the filthiest tourist places I've seen.
It's very surprising.
I was very surprised. I didn't expect itna kachra to be everywhere.
So Manisha, Atul and our reporters were on ground in Jammu, Kashmir and Haryana. In fact, Anmol and Basant are still on ground. They've been bringing you reports, interviews and a lot of interesting stories that are decoding the elections that are ongoing. And Srinivasan Jain and our colleague Aryan have also just returned from Israel, bringing a lot of interesting stories on ground. And Vasu is now gearing up to go to US in a few days to bring his interesting takes on the fascinating Trump versus Harris battle. This is also going to be an NL Sena.
With your contribution, Srinivasan and our team will now report from the US on Trump versus Harris and how it impacts us and back home from several election-bound states. Srinivasan's journalism stands for quality, for public interest and the truth.
So help us support this work by clicking on the link below or scanning this QR code.
Or log on to newslaundry.com and choose a package that works for you. Think journalism, think of us.
Do support us, do subscribe, because all these stories take a lot of time and resources, which is only possible through your support. Head on to newslaundry.com/Sena and choose a contribution amount of your choice. Let's get to Shiv now. Shiv has done a very interesting deep dive. It's called Despite NGT Order, an Adani-operated coal mine got environmental clearance in Chhattisgarh. Shiv, can you take us through the timeline of this story and the clearances?
Right. I think this story has few similarities with Kashmir in the sense it's very emblematic of the governance system, how stakeholders are not involved in the consultation process. Like Manisha said that when Article 370 was abrogated, Kashmiris were very sad and while mainland India was celebrating. So same way in this project, coal mine project, which is in Chhattisgarh, based in Raigad district. So this coal mine is owned by Mahagenco, Maharashtra State Power Corporation Limited. And the MOFCC, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, the MOFCC gave environment clearance to Mahagenco in 2019. And then in 2024, January, there was hearing and everything happened. National Green Tribunal, which is the top environmental court in India, it cancelled the environment clearance on the ground that public hearing which took place in 2019, that public hearing was not in accordance with the law. So when any company goes to MOFCC to get environment clearance, so these project proponent or these companies also have to hold public hearings. And these public hearings have to be impartial and fair. So you give chance to everyone if people have suggestions or objections. So this public hearing happened and court said it's not in accordance with the law. So what you have to do, you have to go back. You have to revisit the whole process from the stage of public hearing.
Okay.
So before you get environment clearance, there's a whole procedure. So you have to get environment management plan done. You are given terms of reference also. You have to comply with some conditions. Then you are given environment clearance. So the public hearing was very shoddy, and then the judgment came in January this year. So what Mahagenco did, they challenged this order in Supreme Court.
Okay.
Within 1 month, I think. And in 2 months, they withdrew the application from Supreme Court. Nobody knew why they withdrew this application, But within 5 days, they again went back to the expert appraisal committee, which is the expert committee of MOFCC, which is headed by one official from, member secretary is one of the officials from MOFCC, and there are other government officials from different departments and couple of retired officials. Earlier, these expert committees, you would see some independent voices, expert voices. But now I don't see any expert voice who will differ with the larger viewpoint of the government.
But just for technicality's sake, what has more power in a situation like this? Is it the NGT or is it the ministry and its expert body?
No, NGT is a tribunal. It can adjudicate on matters related to environment. So if the government gives environment clearance, so people can challenge those environment clearances saying that this is not in accordance with the law. So NGT has the powers to cancel EC, environment clearance. And then if you're not satisfied with the NGT's order or judgment, then the orders can only be challenged in Supreme Court.
Right.
So of course, NGT has the powers. It's in the Act, NGT Act also, that it can adjudicate on matters related to government, even if it's a government order, even if it's a government clearance.
Okay.
So the public hearing I was talking about, then Mahajenko, which is the project proponent, it again approached MOFCC for environment clearance. And the MOFCC also relied on the same public hearing that was flagged by NGT. So that way it's problematic on so many levels, that you are relying on the same public hearing that NGT said it was not in accordance with the law. Instead of doing another public hearing, holding another public hearing of 14 villages which are going to be affected by this project. So that way it, in a sense, violates NGT's order.
Right. So NGT and the government, the ministry's expert body, both have used this public hearing to either cancel the clearance or to give it a go-ahead. Can you tell us about this public hearing and what happened there?
So in 2019, this is a huge project, and this project is in Gare Palma Sector 2. And Gare Palma is in Raigad district. And currently there are some 14 coal blocks in same area.
Okay.
14 coal blocks and 2 power plants, coal washeries. So the whole area is so polluted. So I spoke with representatives from 5 of the 14 villages, and they were saying there is air pollution, there is water pollution, and it's not livable. I mean, it's so inhospitable to live in these areas. And there is no carrying capacity study, comprehensive carrying capacity done. Carrying capacity refers to whether an area can shoulder the burden of a project in terms of how sustainable it is, right? Because natural resources will also have a limit to what extent they can support a project. So this public hearing happened in 2019, and more than, I think, 2,500 people will be displaced because of this project. So public hearing happened in one village, where some 58 people gave their consent that we are with the project. But in 40 villages, there'll be thousands of people. Yeah. And the EIA notification, which delineates or which mandates the procedure of public hearing, it says that you have to hold public hearing in each Gram Panchayat. But the public hearing happened only in one village. And people told me that when they got to know about the public hearing, that public hearing is going to happen in one village, they went to that place, that school where public hearing was supposed to happen. They picketed outside the school at dawn. So there was some 1,000 people outside the school. And those people who gave their consent to the project, they were already inside the school. So NGT in its order has pointed out these things, that who were those 1,000 people who were outside the school and not allowed to participate in public hearing.
Yeah.
So Mahajenko could not clarify why these 1,000 people were outside the school. So I spoke with Sarpanch and Pradhans and Panch. They were saying that we were protesting against this project, and our voices were not heard. We were not given a chance to be heard in one public hearing. So these 14 villages, there are 9 Gram Panchayats. So each Gram Panchayat could have multiple villages. So ideally, public hearing should have happened in 9 gram panchayats, which did not happen. And when they went to one village for public hearing, they were not given a chance. So the whole procedure was bypassed.
And you see this in many cases.
Right. And especially these villages are villages are dominated by tribal communities.
Right. I was going to ask, who are the communities that are affected?
And they rely on farming. So they're saying, look at our farms, our agricultural land. It's so polluted. Groundwater is so polluted. And there are so many studies. The NGT judgment talks about that you haven't considered reports on air pollution, health impact, on water pollution. So you should have taken into consideration these reports on pollution levels. But then when the second environment clearance was given, so there were some new reports contradicting the old reports.
Okay. And what are the kind of compensation that is offered, and what is the main reason that the communities are not ready, that they don't think this compensation is going to be a good idea?
One of the representatives that I spoke to, he was saying that the firms which are into coal mining, they started coming to Chhattisgarh in the 90s. So they would have lease period of 30 years, 30 years or so. So he's saying, I have seen how communities have not benefited from these coal projects. Because when these companies go to come to us or start, when they start coal mining, before coal mining starts, they promise a lot of things to us. But I've seen what has happened in nearby areas. These communities have given their land, their agricultural land, their houses in lieu of nothing. Companies would promise jobs. Companies would say that these are the benefits that will accrue to you. But nothing has happened. So that's why people
All of them just get some contracts. Many of them don't get the permanent jobs that they want.
So contracts would be given to those who are muscle men, who can influence society, who can influence villages, who are close to the companies. So only those people may benefit to some extent, but not society at large.
Right.
So that is one of the grouses of villages, and they're saying pollution is one of the issues why we are opposing it.
Okay.
And I mean, this coal project hasn't reached at the stage of compensation because the land has not been acquired. Second clearance has been given just now in August.
But they would also be relocated then.
They will be relocated. So compensation, so since we haven't reached, the project hasn't reached the stage of
clear,
compensation. And they are also saying that we might get 5 lakh per acre. But if I can't get 1 acre in other areas in same amount of money.
Yeah, definitely.
So other places, if I have to buy agricultural land, it will be 30 lakh per acre. So the compensation is also less. And there are so many middlemen who might take a share in that compensation amount.
And how common is it for NGT to cancel clearances?
Off late, it has become very rare. NGT has to be convinced thoroughly that the process or the procedure before giving clearance was illegal. So it's also interesting to see who the petitioners were in NGT case. So all these 4 petitioners were from Gare Palma area, from the affected villages, and they filed. For tribal communities to go to NGT to file cases, prepare petitions, it's a huge task, and for them to go there in NGT Central Zone. So this case was heard in Central Zone, which is Bhopal.
Okay.
So to go there to appear for hearings.
How long did it go on?
They filed in 2022 and it went on about for 1 year. And August 2023 was the last time when hearing took place.
Right.
And from August till January when the order came, NGT took good 5-6 months to come up with this order. So it's I don't know why it took so long, but it cancelled the EC. So the case was represented by only villagers, and one of them was applicant person who argued on behalf of those petitioners. There was no lawyer.
Okay, it was in person.
Yeah, in person.
Right.
So that way, and you can also look at the Mahagenco is the public sector firm from Maharashtra.
So what is Adani's role in this?
Mahagenco has tied up with Adani subsidiary, one Adani subsidiary, special purpose vehicle. Adani is a mine developer and operator. So Adani is going to mine that area, develop that area for mining. So that's the Adani role in the whole coal mine project.
There are a lot of other interesting details in this story. Do read it on Newslaundry. It is titled, Despite NGT Order, an Adani-operated coal mine got environmental clearance in Chhattisgarh. Now we'll come to the last segment of our podcast, which is recommendations. So Shiv, let's start with you since you're an RWO veteran.
I haven't finished, but I'm still reading a book by Pankaj Sheikh Saria. Pankaj Sheikh Saria is a professor in IIT Bombay. The book is titled The Great Nicobar Betrayal.
I've heard about this.
Yeah. So I'm still in the middle of it. So it's a collection of several essays. So, I mean, the book is about the Great Nicobar holistic quote-unquote project, which entails a port project, then the township, then civilian defense airport, and few other things, and a power plant. So it talks about how this project is going to affect the communities there, and what are the how this project was cleared by so many bodies, so many government bodies. So it also looks into the ecological aspect of this project, how ecologically devastating this project is. It's a short book. It gives you a snapshot of the history of Great Nicobar, its ecological history, and indigenous history about indigenous people in Great Nicobar. So yeah, this is the book I'm reading. I hope I finish it soon.
Sure. Manisha, what about you? We'll get to your recommendation before Hafta does.
I read a really fun piece in the New Yorker, which is the case against travel. And the piece is basically about why traveling is the shittiest thing to do and why it turns us into the worst versions of ourselves. As someone who really loves to travel, I thought this piece did a very convincing job of making a case against travel. I thought it was very cleverly written about also this epidemic of traveling and making it a personality trait. Like traveling is no longer about, just something you do with your money when you have the free time. It's also become a personality, it's a personality asset. So I think it's a very cleverly written piece. Since this is Reporters Without Orders, I will suggest two pieces which aren't newsy, but they're really fine pieces of reportage, and they talk about journalism, they talk about reporting, they talk about reporters' life. The first one is one of my absolute favorite pieces called The Fabulist. It's in the Vanity Fair. The second one is a New York Times piece. I remember this piece very vividly because this is a journalist who goes to Rohingya refugee camps, and she finds out that a lot of people, even in the depths of their miseries, were lying to her. And so the story explores why some stories, even the most saddest of people or even the most victimized people, can lie, and why journalists always have to be careful about buying whatever people are telling them. So I think it's a very fabulous piece. It's called The Rohingya Suffer Real Horrors. So why are some of their stories untrue? And the third piece is also one of my all-time favorite journalistic pieces. It's in the Airmail. It's called Loving Lies. It's about a very famous case. A movie was also made on it, about a reporter who plagiarized. And he did like very elaborate plagiarism, like in the sense that he would make up, if he was quoting a source of a website, he would go to the extent of making up that website.
Oh, wow.
It's a fabulous story of plagiarism, getting caught, redemption, and then what he learns.
Okay, very interesting reads. I'd like to recommend The Midwife's Confession, which is a documentary by journalist Amitabh Parishar along with BBC. It's available on BBC's website and on YouTube channel. It's a little over an hour. I watched it last week at a screening and cried a lot. It's an amazing documentary that has taken Amitabh more than 30 years to make. It explores the history of female infanticide and how in a district of Bihar, midwives were made to kill newborn girls. And initially we see a lot of these midwives confess to how they've killed more than 10 to 15 baby girls each. And then through a social campaign that changed. They started rescuing the girls instead. And it's a fascinating...
And it has really old footage, I believe,
yes,
right? They have footage from the 90s.
Yeah, 95.
I've heard a lot about this.
It's a great, I think, storytelling journalism. There's a lot to explore here. And really the Amitabh's... his lens of not really viewing these women as criminals but as victims of the system is very fascinating and very, I think, important to also note. So do watch that, and do watch Manisha's story from ground, not just a media story. There are several other stories. She has several angles she's explored from Kashmir, from Jammu, and Shiv's report as well, and continue to support us. This podcast is now adjourned.
Journalism at Newslaundry is powered by the public, because when the public pays, the public is served. Visit newslaundry.com/subscription and pick a payment plan of your choice. Pay to keep news free and independent. Your future, and indeed the future of democracy, depends on it.